The hidden rules of money they don't teach in school, full audiobook. Chapter 1. The Illusion of Education. You grew up believing that the path to security was paved with classrooms, textbooks, and perfect grades. You were told that if you worked hard in school, listened to every teacher, and memorized every formula, the future would reward you with stability. That belief was comforting, but also dangerous, because what nobody explained is that the education system was never designed to teach you how money truly works. It was designed to prepare you to fit into a structure, not to rise above it. Think back to your earliest memories of school. From the first day, you were rewarded for obedience. You learned to raise your hand, to sit still for hours, to copy what was written on the blackboard, and to regurgitate information on command. The better you performed this routine, the more praise you received. What you did not notice at the time is that you were being trained for employment, not empowerment. You were learning to trade your hours for approval, and later you would trade those same hours for wages. The rule was simple: do what you are told and you will be paid. Yet nobody mentioned that this exchange has limits. Your hours are finite, and when your income depends only on hours, your wealth is capped. Consider how little space money itself occupied in your years of study. You might have spent 12 years mastering geometry, memorizing the periodic table, or analyzing ancient wars. Yet not once were you given a class on how to manage credit, how to negotiate a salary, or how to build an asset that pays you back. You graduated knowing how to solve quadratic equations, but not how compound interest would either enslave you or enrich you. You may have left school without ever seeing the inside of a mortgage contract, but those documents would soon shape the rest of your adult life. This silence was not an accident. It was part of the illusion. Take the example of Martin, a young man who grew up in a small town. He was bright, disciplined, and trusted that education would give him everything he needed. He studied diligently, earned high grades, and was accepted into a respected university. After 4 years of sleepless nights and tens of thousands of dollars in student loans, he graduated with honors. He felt proud. He believed his degree was his ticket to prosperity. But reality greeted him differently. His first job paid $38,000 per year. From that salary, almost $12,000 went immediately to taxes. Another $6,000 went to student loan payments. Rent consumed another $10,000, and transportation another $4,000. By the end of the year, Martin had little more than $6,000 left for food, emergencies, and the hope of saving. The numbers were clear. The system had prepared him to work, but not to prosper. This story is not unusual. Millions follow the same script, repeating the same steps with blind faith. You see people chase credentials as if the paper itself could produce wealth. They believe the diploma is the prize, when in truth it is only the beginning of another race. The wealthy understand that the real education starts where school ends. They know that the hidden rules are not printed in textbooks, but passed quietly from parent to child, mentor to student, through conversations and experiences you will never find in a classroom. One of the most damaging illusions you inherited is the belief that grades equal intelligence and intelligence equals wealth. You can look around you and see that the world does not confirm this myth. Some of the brightest minds remain trapped in poverty, while many of the wealthiest people you know were average students at best. The difference is not intelligence, but knowledge of the rules. A wealthy person might have been a mediocre student, but they learned how to buy a small property at the age of 25, collect rent that exceeded the mortgage payment, and repeat this process. By the time their classmates were still paying student loans, they were already collecting income without labor. That was a rule never mentioned in school. The rule that wealth grows faster when your money begins to work harder than you do. Think of your own experience. How many hours did you spend learning to analyze literature? How many nights were devoted to memorizing chemical reactions? These skills may have enriched your mind, but did they enrich your wallet? When the bills arrived, when the rent was due, when your family needed security, you quickly discovered that knowledge without financial application leaves you defenseless. The illusion of education is that it makes you believe preparation is the same as readiness. But preparation without the right tools is incomplete. The wealthy treat education differently. They see formal schooling as a foundation, not a finish line. They encourage curiosity, but they also know curiosity must be applied. When their children ask questions about money, They answer with examples, not theories. A father might show his child how $100 placed in an investment account at the age of 10 could grow to more than $10,000 by the time they reach retirement, simply through the compounding of interest. He explains that the earlier you understand this, the more freedom you will have. That one lesson is worth more than a dozen years of memorized history dates. It is a seed of financial literacy that grows into confidence, independence, and eventually wealth. There's another hidden rule that school ignored, the rule of failure. In classrooms, mistakes are punished. A wrong answer lowers your grade, damages your average, and is seen as weakness. But in real life, mistakes are often the only way to learn. Every successful investor, entrepreneur, or creator has a trail of failure behind them, each one a lesson that school never allowed. When you were taught to fear mistakes, you were trained to fear risk. And when you fear risk, you avoid opportunities. That is why so many educated people live cautiously, working stable jobs, earning predictable salaries, and never daring to step into the uncertain territory where wealth is created. Education also teaches competition instead of collaboration. You were told to keep your eyes on your own paper, to protect your answers, to fight for the best rank. Collaboration was often labeled as cheating. Yet in the world of money, collaboration is the key. Partnerships build companies, networks create opportunities, and shared ideas multiply results. The wealthy are unafraid to collaborate because they know wealth expands when people pool their skills and resources. Imagine if you had been trained from the start to seek partners instead of rivals. How many doors might have opened sooner? The illusion of education is powerful because it hides inside something noble. Learning is good. Discipline is valuable. Knowledge is beautiful. But when these are offered without context, without financial truth, they become a cage. You work hard. You obey. You excel in systems that were never designed to make you free. Only when you recognize the illusion can you begin to see the cracks in the wall. You realize that while your schooling gave you tools, it withheld the map. The rules you needed to build wealth were always present, but never spoken. Now you stand at a crossroads. You can keep believing that more certificates will rescue you, that another degree will finally make the difference, or you can admit that the system gave you only part of the picture. Once you see the illusion, you cannot unsee it. The truth is that wealth requires unlearning as much as it requires learning. You must unlearn the idea that effort equals income, unlearn the fear of failure, unlearn the belief that money is complicated and reserved for the gifted. And in their place, you must adopt the hidden rules. Money rewards those who make it move. Wealth flows to those who measure time differently. And freedom belongs to those who dare to step beyond the script they were handed in school. You were trained to believe that the classroom is the ultimate source of wisdom, yet most of what shapes your financial destiny happens outside those walls. That is the cruel paradox. You invest years in memorizing lessons that will fade, while the crucial lessons, the ones about money, power, and independence, remain hidden. You leave school thinking you are prepared for life, when in truth, you were only prepared for work. Look at how education framed your expectations. The path was drawn for you. Finish school, go to college, get a job, buy a house, and retire after 4 decades. That story was presented as universal truth, but it was only ever a template for control. It guaranteed that you would be a reliable worker, a predictable taxpayer, and a consumer of loans. The hidden rule that you never heard is that this system thrives on your obedience. The less you question it, the smoother it runs. That is why no teacher ever handed you a manual on building passive income. That is why you never spent a semester studying the psychology of wealth. If you had, you might have noticed that the system itself profits most when you do not. Consider the numbers. Imagine you borrow $20,000 in student loans at the age of 22. The interest rate is fixed at 6%, and the repayment schedule stretches for 10 years. By the time you finish paying, you will have returned nearly $27,000. That extra $7,000 did not buy you books or knowledge. It was simply the cost of borrowing. At the same time, if you had placed that same $20,000 in an investment growing at an average annual rate of 8%, in those same 10 years, it would have grown to more than $43,000. This single example reveals a brutal truth. The system teaches you how to borrow, but not how to invest, because borrowing makes others rich while investing could make you free. Let's return to Martin, the young man from Part A. After several years, he tried to escape the trap by enrolling in a master's degree. He convinced himself that more schooling would solve the financial stress. Another loan, another classroom, another 2 years of lectures. But when he graduated, his salary increased only by $6,000 per year, while his total debt doubled. He worked longer hours, under heavier stress, all in the name of progress. And yet, despite his credentials, he still had less than $500 in savings at the end of each month. Martin's story is repeated in countless households. The illusion of education is that more certificates equal more security, when often they simply mean more chains. You must also examine how the classroom shaped your relationship with authority. You learned to depend on external validation. A teacher graded your assignments, an institution validated your diploma, a company validated your resume. Rarely were you taught to validate yourself. Wealth requires self-validation. It requires that you see value in your ideas, your risks, your capacity to create. Without this, you will always wait for permission that never comes. The hidden rule is that no one gives you permission to be wealthy. You must claim it. Another rule that education concealed is the rule of curiosity. Children are naturally curious, asking why, how, and what if. But in school, curiosity is often crushed beneath rigid syllabi and standardized tests. You were rewarded for giving the expected answer, not for asking dangerous questions. Yet it is dangerous questions that create wealth. What if I rent out a room in my house instead of living alone? What if I invest in this small company before it becomes popular? What if I learn a skill that others are afraid to master? Each what has the power to reshape your future, but only if curiosity survives the classroom. Imagine Sarah, a young woman who grew up with average grades and little interest in traditional education. Instead of pursuing another degree after high school, she apprenticed under a local entrepreneur who repaired cars. She learned quickly, asked questions about margins, labor costs, and customer retention. By the age of 24, she had saved $15,000 and used it to buy a small garage. Within 3 years, she expanded to a second location, hired 5 employees, and generated an annual profit of nearly $90,000. Sarah never memorized complex equations, but she mastered the rule of value creation. Her story proves that financial education begins when you step outside the illusion and start asking the questions that school never encouraged. The wealthy treat mistakes as tuition. Every failed business, every bad investment, every missed opportunity becomes a lesson that compounds. If you lose $10,000 in a failed project, that loss becomes the price of wisdom. If you learn from it, you can create a system that earns you $100,000 later. Meanwhile, those who cling to the classroom mindset avoid mistakes at all costs, which means they avoid experiences that could transform them. They remain safe, but also stagnant. This is the hidden cost of obedience. Safety at the expense of growth. There is also the illusion of meritocracy, the belief that the best workers are always rewarded. In school, you saw that high grades brought recognition. You carried that logic into the workplace, expecting that excellence alone would bring wealth. But money does not obey the same law. In the real world, it is not the hardest worker who is paid the most, but the one who controls the system. The person who owns a factory earns more than the one who sweats on the floor. The landlord earns while the tenant pays. The investor collects while the employee waits. Hard work is noble, but without leverage it remains small. School prepared you to work hard, but it never prepared you to think in terms of ownership. When you step back, you see the pattern clearly. The system needs workers, not visionaries. It needs debtors, not investors. It needs obedient taxpayers, not free thinkers. That is why the rules were hidden. The wealthy do not need to conspire to keep them secret. The system itself performs that function. Your challenge is to notice the gaps and fill them yourself. You may still feel anger when you realize how much time you spend under the illusion. That anger is natural, but it is also a spark. It forces you to see that the diploma hanging on your wall, while valuable in some ways, is not a guarantee of wealth. It is only a tool. Wealth begins when you start learning the rules that were left out. Wealth begins when you stop confusing preparation with empowerment. Wealth begins when you choose to see beyond the illusion. Chapter 2. The Silent Power of Cash Flow. You've been told that income is everything. People around you brag about their salaries, chase promotions, and celebrate raises as if they were the final measure of success. But income is not the truth. The real measure is cash flow, the movement of money in and out of your life. The rule is simple. It does not matter how much you earn if it leaves your hands as quickly as it arrives. Wealth is not about income, but about control. Think of two friends, Daniel and Joseph. Daniel earns $80,000 per year, while Joseph earns only $50,000. On the surface, Daniel appears wealthier. He drives a new car, wears expensive clothes, and posts photos from vacations. But if you look closer, you see that his rent consumes $24,000, his car loan swallows $9,000, his credit cards demand another $12,000, and taxes take nearly $20,000. At the end of the year, Daniel has little more than $5,000 left. Joseph, on the other hand, lives in a modest apartment for $12,000 annually, drives a car he owns outright, spends carefully, and invests consistently. After all expenses, Joseph saves more than $10,000 every year. Though his income is lower, his cash flow is stronger. He is building wealth while Daniel is building appearances. This is the silent power of cash flow. It reveals that wealth is not what you make, but what you keep and where you direct it. Yet, school never taught you this principle. Instead, it conditioned you to focus on the size of your paycheck, as if more digits automatically meant more freedom. That illusion is the reason so many people live paycheck to paycheck, regardless of how high their salaries climb. Cash flow is a game of direction, not just amount. Imagine you receive $3,000 each month. If $2,500 go to fix expenses and another $300 consumer debt, you are left with nothing. But if you redirect even $500 into an investment that grows at 8% annually, in 20 years you will hold nearly $300,000. The discipline of directing your cash flow transforms small choices into massive outcomes. The wealthy understand this rule, and they design their lives around it. Consider Maria, a single mother who worked as a nurse. Her salary was never extraordinary, around $42,000 per year, but she was disciplined with her cash flow. Each month, she forced herself to set aside $400, no matter how difficult it was. She learned to live on less, but she always paid herself first. After a decade, her savings and investments had grown to nearly $70,000. At that point, she purchased a small duplex and rented out one side while living in the other. The rent she collected covered her mortgage and even left her with extra. Her cash flow improved not because her salary doubled, but because she redirected money into an asset that began paying her back. That decision changed the course of her life and her son's future. You see, the wealthy view cash flow as the bloodstream of their financial lives. They watch carefully not just how much enters, but how much exits and where it goes. They know that positive cash flow builds security, while negative cash flow destroys it. This is why businesses fail when they cannot manage it, even if sales are strong. The same principle applies to your household. You can bring in a six-figure income, but if every month ends with overdraft fees, you are as fragile as someone earning minimum wage. What makes cash flow so powerful is that it compounds invisibly. Nobody sees the quiet discipline of saving and investing each month. Nobody applauds the choice to live below your means or to drive an older car. But over years, these decisions accumulate like hidden bricks, building a fortress of freedom. Meanwhile, those who chase appearances remain exposed. They may look successful today, but one missed paycheck, one medical emergency, or one economic downturn shatters the illusion. Cash flow is not glamorous, but it is the foundation. Another hidden rule is that cash flow buys you time. Imagine you build assets that produce $2,000 per month in passive income. That may not sound like much, but if your monthly expenses are also $2,000, you are effectively free. You no longer depend on a job to survive. You own your time. Compare this to someone earning $100,000 per year, but spending $95,000. They may appear rich, but they are chained to their job. The difference is not in income, but in the relationship between cash flow and expenses. Think about David, an engineer who earned $90,000 annually. For years, he struggled to save, convinced his salary was too modest compared to his peers in finance or medicine. Then he discovered real estate investing. He purchased a small house for $120,000, renting it for $1,200 each month, while the mortgage cost only $800. That $400 surplus seemed small, but within 5 years he had acquired 3 more properties. His monthly cash flow from rentals reached nearly $2,000. When a corporate downsizing eliminated his job, David did not panic. His cash flow carried him through unemployment and gave him freedom to choose his next path. That was the silent power working for him. The illusion that destroys most people is confusing high income with strength. A big paycheck can feel intoxicating, but if it all disappears into expenses and debt, it leaves nothing behind. The wealthy rarely brag about their salaries. Instead, they quietly monitor cash flow, making sure that each month moves them further from dependence and closer to freedom. They know that the true scorecard is not income but stability. At this moment, you might look at your own numbers and feel uncomfortable. Perhaps your expenses swallow your income, leaving no room to breathe. That discomfort is valuable. It is the alarm that wakes you up to the hidden rule. You cannot control the size of your paycheck overnight, but you can control the direction of your cash flow today. Every dollar you choose to redirect becomes a soldier in your army, fighting for your future instead of someone else's. This is where wealth begins, not in big raises, but in small redirections, repeated faithfully until they change everything. You already know that cash flow determines your financial strength, but what you may not realize is how silently it shapes your emotions, your relationships, and your choices. Positive cash flow gives you peace. Negative cash flow steals your sleep. You have felt it before. The anxiety of watching bills pile up, the stress of waiting for the next paycheck, the arguments that erupt in households when money runs short. These are not just numbers on a page. They are forces that dominate your daily life. When your cash flow is weak, every decision feels like a burden. You hesitate to take a vacation because you fear the credit card bill. You hesitate to change jobs because you cannot risk a week without income. You hesitate to start a business because you cannot survive the uncertainty. This hesitation is not about lack of courage. It is about lack of cash flow. Meanwhile, those who have mastered it live differently. They can take risks, try new ventures, and invest in opportunities because they know their base is stable. Take the story of Elena and Mark, a married couple in their mid-30s. Elena worked as a teacher, earning $45,000 annually, while Mark earned $55,000 as a technician. Together, their income was $100,000, which sounded impressive to friends and family. Yet their expenses consumed nearly every dollar. A large mortgage, 2 car loans, credit cards, and private school tuition left them with less than $300 each month in savings. One unexpected medical bill of $2,000 sent them into panic. For years, they lived with this stress, trapped in a cycle of fear. One day, they decided to flip the script. They sold one of their cars, paid down a portion of their credit card debt, and redirected the money into investments. At first, the changes felt small, $200 extra each month set aside. But after 3 years, those investments began to generate dividends of nearly $3,000 per year. That additional cash flow relieved pressure and created momentum. Within a decade, they owned rental property producing $1,200 monthly. Their household was no longer a fragile structure collapsing under weight. It became a fortress built on steady streams of income. Their marriage improved, their confidence grew, and their choices expanded. This is the silent but transformative power of cash flow. Another hidden rule is that wealth is not built from occasional windfalls, but from consistent direction. Many people dream of receiving a large bonus, winning a settlement, or inheriting money. They imagine that one lump sum will change their destiny. But history shows that windfalls often disappear. Without strong cash flow habits, sudden money vanishes quickly. Just look at lottery winners who collect millions only to file for bankruptcy within years. They lack the discipline of flow. Compare that to someone who earns a modest income, but consistently directs $300 each month into investments for 30 years. With compound growth at 8%, those small contributions would grow to nearly $450,000. That is the difference between a dreamer and a builder. One waits for fortune. The other creates it through flow. Cash flow also reveals a hidden trap of lifestyle inflation. The moment many people increase their income, they increase their expenses even faster. A promotion leads to a bigger house, a fancier car, and a more expensive wardrobe. What could have been positive cash flow turns into debt, and the cycle repeats. The wealthy resist this temptation. When their income rises, they maintain discipline. They channel the extra into assets, not appearances. Over time, the gap between their cash flow and that of others becomes enormous, even if their initial salaries were the same. You may think that building strong cash flow requires huge sacrifices, but in reality, it requires awareness. Look at your monthly spending. Do you know where each dollar goes? Most people do not. They drift through weeks and months, swiping cards without attention. Awareness alone can transform your flow. Imagine you discover that you spend $400 monthly on subscriptions, meals, and conveniences you barely use. If you redirect even half of that, $200, into a growing investment, you'll create nearly $75,000 in 20 years. The difference is not deprivation, but redirection. The wealthy often use businesses as vehicles for cash flow. A small cafe may produce only modest profits each month, but if those profits are consistent, they can fund new ventures. An online store may generate only $500 per month, but that is $500 that arrives regardless of your salary. These streams, once established, create resilience. They insulate you from economic storms. That is why wealthy families often have multiple sources of cash flow: rental properties, investments, royalties, businesses. They do not depend on one paycheck. They build a river of income that keeps flowing even when one stream dries up. Think of Henry, a young graphic designer who started freelancing on the side. At first, he made only $200 monthly from small projects. Instead of spending it, he directed the money into a portfolio of dividend-paying stocks. Over time, his portfolio grew and began paying him $500 in annual dividends, then $1,000, then $2,000. By the time his side business grew into a full agency, his investments were generating nearly $10,000 per year. Without his effort, his cash flow multiplied silently, creating a safety net and a springboard. Henry's story proves that even small streams, faithfully maintained, turn into rivers of freedom. You must see that cash flow is not just a financial concept. It is a life concept. It determines whether you wake up with peace or panic. It determines whether you say yes to opportunities or no to everything. It determines whether your future is built on hope or on structure. School never taught you this because the system did not want you free. It wanted you dependent. But now that you see the rule, you can choose differently. Cash flow is your compass. It points you toward freedom if you follow it, and it warns you of danger if you ignore it. You do not need to earn millions to win. You need to control the flow you already have, redirect it with intention, and let it multiply quietly over time. This is the power the wealthy respect, the power that creates freedom long before income alone could ever promise it. Chapter 3. The Cost of Time Ignored. You can recover lost money, but you can never recover lost time. That is the rule nobody explained in school. You were trained to trade hours for wages without being told that every trade was a piece of your life. The illusion was that a steady paycheck equaled safety, but the reality is that if all your wealth depends on your labor, then your time is being consumed like fuel in a fire. And once those hours are burned, they are gone forever. From the moment you enter the workforce, you learn to think in terms of schedules. 40 hours per week, 2 weeks of vacation, 40 years until retirement. These numbers became your cage. You accepted them as normal because everyone else did. But the wealthy think in different numbers. They do not measure life in hours worked, but in hours owned. They ask, how much of my time belongs to me, and how much belongs to someone else? That question changes everything. Imagine this. You earn $50,000 per year, working 2,000 hours annually. That means your time is valued at $25 per hour. Every lunch, every errand, every moment spent working overtime is priced at that rate. Now imagine that instead of using those hours to build something that grows, you sell them all year after year. After 10 years, you'll have traded 20,000 hours for $500,000. most of which has already been spent on taxes, rent, and bills. Your time is gone and you have nothing left to show for it. Meanwhile, someone else might have invested a fraction of their hours into building an asset, writing a book, acquiring a property, starting a business, that continues to pay them long after the work is done. The difference is not talent, but the awareness of time. Consider the story of Leonard, a talented architect. He worked tirelessly at a prestigious firm, often pulling 60-hour weeks. His salary was generous, $120,000 annually, but his lifestyle consumed nearly all of it. The irony was painful. The more he worked, the less time he had to enjoy his earnings. Vacations were short and interrupted by calls. Family dinners were rushed. He promised himself that one day, after retirement, he would finally live. But then tragedy struck. At 52, he suffered a stroke that ended his career abruptly. Decades of labor vanished into the past, and the future he had postponed never arrived. Leonard's story is a harsh reminder. Ignoring the cost of time can erase the very future you thought you were working toward. The wealthy understand the compound effect of time. They know that 1 hour invested today in building systems, assets, or relationships multiplies into thousands of hours saved tomorrow. For example, if you dedicate 100 hours to learning real estate investing in your 20s, you might acquire a rental property that pays you $12,000 annually. That 100 hours continues to return value every single year, long after the learning is complete. Over 20 years, that decision yields nearly $250,000 in income. Meanwhile, those who never invest their time strategically remain trapped, selling each hour at market price and starting from zero again the next day. Another hidden cost of ignoring time is opportunity. When you spend all your energy chasing income, you leave no space to recognize opportunities that could change your life. You may see a chance to partner in a business, but you are too exhausted. You may want to invest in your education, but your schedule suffocates you. You may dream of writing, painting, inventing, or mentoring, but you never begin because time is always short. The wealthy protect their time like treasure. They delegate tasks, automate systems, and eliminate distractions. They know that every hour wasted on what does not matter is an hour stolen from what could build freedom. Think of Emily, a young accountant. For years, she worked long hours, convincing herself that promotions were the path forward. She earned $70,000 annually but felt constantly drained. One day, she decided to shift her perspective. Instead of using evenings to scroll through endless distractions, she devoted just 2 hours per night to creating an online course teaching basic bookkeeping for small businesses. At first, sales were slow, but within a year, her course generated an extra $600 monthly. Within 3 years, it produced nearly $2,000 per month. Those 2 hours each night, protected and invested, created a stream of income that bought her time back. By the time she reached her mid-30s, she had the choice to work part-time or travel. Supported by the flow she built, Emily discovered what Leonard never did. Time must be invested, not only spent. You must understand that the clock is always running, whether you are conscious of it or not. Every day you either trade time for survival or invest it for freedom. The hidden rule is that money grows, but time only shrinks. That is why every wealthy person you admire treats time as their rarest asset. They calculate the value of their hours, and they ask whether each task is worth the cost. If not, they delegate, automate, or eliminate. They refuse to waste the one resource that cannot be replenished. The tragedy of the traditional system is that it conditions you to postpone life. Work hard now, enjoy later. Sacrifice your best years in the hope of comfort decades ahead. But later is never guaranteed. If you wait until retirement to live, you risk discovering that your health, your energy, or your relationships will not wait with you. The wealthy live differently. They build systems that allow them to enjoy time in the present, not only in the distant future. That is the cost of time respected, not ignored. At this point, you must ask yourself, how much of your time belongs to you? How many of your hours are spent building assets that will continue to reward you long after the work is complete? And how many are consumed by obligations that leave nothing behind? The answers may unsettle you, but they are the beginning of awareness. Once you see the cost of time ignored, you can begin to value it correctly. And once you value it, you will never spend it the same way again. You were taught to think of time as an endless resource. Each morning, the sun rises, and the hours stretch before you as if they will never run out. But that is an illusion. Time is the only currency you cannot earn back, and every decision you make is a trade. When you ignore this truth, you lose more than money. You lose life itself. The system conditions you to devalue your time. Employers tell you that overtime is loyalty, that sacrificing weekends is commitment, that working through lunch is ambition. But loyalty, commitment, and ambition mean little if they consume the very hours you need to build your own freedom. The hidden rule is simple. If you do not place value on your time, someone else will, and they will always value it at less than it is worth. Look at the math. If you work 50 hours a week instead of 40, you're giving away an extra 500 hours each year. Over a decade, that becomes 5,000 hours, more than 2 full years of your life, assuming a standard work week. If those hours are spent building someone else's vision, without building assets of your own, they vanish forever. But if even a fraction of those hours were directed into something that compounds, a business, an investment, a skill, the result will be life-changing. Consider Jonathan, a lawyer in his early 40s. His salary was impressive, over $180,000 annually, but his life was consumed by his firm. 12-hour days were common. Weekends were sacrificed, and his family barely saw him. He told himself it was temporary, that once he made partner, life would ease. But when the promotion finally arrived, the hours only increased. Despite his high income, Jonathan felt trapped, exhausted, and disconnected. Then one evening, his 10-year-old daughter asked him why he never came to her soccer games. In that moment, he realized the cost of ignoring time was not only his exhaustion, but the relationships he was losing. The money he earned could never buy back those missed moments. His wealth was real on paper, but hollow in life. The wealthy know how to measure opportunity cost. They understand that saying yes to one thing always means saying no to another. If you spend 3 hours each night numbing yourself with distractions, you're saying no to learning a new skill, no to nurturing your health, no to building assets. Those lost hours accumulate quietly until decades later you wonder where your dreams went. The truth is they were spent one distracted evening at a time. Another hidden cost of ignoring time is debt. When you delay building assets, you end up borrowing from the future. For example, someone who chooses not to invest in their 20s may spend their 30s and 40s catching up, losing decades of compound growth. If you invest $200 monthly starting at age 20 at an average growth rate of 8%, you'll have nearly $600,000 by age 60. But if you wait until age 30 to begin, the same effort produces less than $300,000. The cost of that lost decade is $300,000, a price paid not with money, but with time ignored. Let's look at Sophia, a woman who worked as a receptionist for 15 years. Her salary was modest, around $32,000 annually, and she often felt she had no time to improve her situation. After work, she collapsed in front of the television, convincing herself that rest was all she could afford. But at age 38, she began to rethink her time. She committed 2 hours each night to learning graphic design. Within a year, she was freelancing on weekends. Within 5 years, her side business replaced her full-time income, earning her nearly $75,000 annually with far more flexibility. Sophia discovered what had been hidden all along. The hours she thought were too small to matter were the very hours that transformed her life. The greatest tragedy of ignoring time is regret. At the end of life, few people wish they had spent more hours in the office. They wish they had invested time in family, in passion, in building something lasting. Regret is the invoice life sends when you treat time as infinite. The wealthy avoid this by aligning their use of time with their values. They ask, what do I want my days to look like? Then they build systems and assets to make that vision possible. You must also see that time magnifies wealth differently for each decision you make. 1 hour spent networking with the right people can create opportunities worth millions. 1 hour spent procrastinating adds nothing. The wealthy weigh each choice carefully, not because they are obsessed with productivity, but because they respect the finite nature of their hours. They understand that protecting time is protecting life itself. So ask yourself, how much of your time do you spend investing in your future? And how much do you spend maintaining illusions? How many hours go to survival? And how many to growth? These questions are uncomfortable, but they cut to the truth. Every hour is a seed, and if you fail to plant it wisely, you cannot harvest later. The hidden rule is this: money wasted can be earned again, but time wasted is gone forever. Once you feel the weight of this truth, you cannot return to old habits. You begin to see your calendar as a reflection of your priorities, and you choose differently. That is the cost of time acknowledged, not ignored. Chapter 4: The Hidden Language of Assets and Liabilities. You were never taught to speak the language of money. Instead, you were given fragments: how to write a check, how to balance an account, how to file a tax return. These are surface skills, like learning a handful of phrases in a foreign tongue without ever understanding the grammar. Beneath the surface, money speaks its own hidden language, a code of assets and liabilities. Until you learn it, you will always be lost in translation. The rule is simple but profound. Assets put money into your pocket, liabilities take money out. Yet this truth was never spoken in school. You were encouraged to think of houses, cars, and possessions as signs of success, even when they quietly drained you. You were told that buying a home is the greatest investment, even if the mortgage, maintenance, and taxes consume more than the property ever returned. Without fluency in a language, you confuse liabilities for assets and wonder why you remain stuck. Consider this example. Imagine you purchase a house worth $200,000 with a 30-year mortgage. The monthly payment is $1,200. Property taxes add another $200, and maintenance averages $100. Altogether, you pay $1,500 each month, or $18,000 annually. If you live in the home, that money flows out of your pocket. The house is not producing income. It is consuming it. Only when you rent that same property for $2,000 monthly, covering expenses and leaving $500 surplus, does the house speak the language of an asset. Until then, it is a liability disguised as security. Think of vehicles. You are told that a new car is a reward for your labor, proof that you are progressing. But the moment you drive it off the lot, its value drops. Loan payments, insurance, fuel, and repairs drain your cash flow. Unless the car produces income, for example, by being used in a delivery business or rented out, it is not an asset. It is a liability, no matter how polished it looks in the driveway. The wealthy are fluent in this language. They look at every decision through the lens of flow. Will this purchase add money or remove it? Will it feed me or feed on me? By asking these questions, they separate themselves from the masses who collect liabilities and call them achievements. Take the story of Marcus, a young professional who earned $65,000 annually. As soon as he received his first big bonus, he purchased a luxury car for $45,000. The monthly loan was $600, insurance another $200, fuel nearly $150, and maintenance about $100. Each month, nearly $1,000 left his account just to own the car. At first, he felt proud. Friends admired it. Strangers complimented it. But after 2 years, the excitement faded while the payments remained. That same 2 years could have directed $24,000 into assets producing dividends or rental income. Instead, the money evaporated into liability. Marcus eventually sold the car at a loss, realizing he had paid dearly for status while his net worth shrank. Contrast that with Laura, who earned less, around $50,000 annually, but spoke the hidden language. Instead of upgrading her lifestyle with her first bonus, she purchased a small vending machine route for $8,000. The machines produced nearly $400 profit each month. She reinvested those profits into more machines, growing her route to 20 locations. Within 5 years, her vending business generated almost $25,000 annually, half her salary. The vending machines were assets, whispering in the language of freedom, while Marcus's car screamed in the language of debt. This is the essence of the hidden grammar. Every financial decision says one of two things. Either, I will give you more, or I will take from you. The tragedy is that most people never translate the message. They buy liabilities and wonder why their cash flow shrinks. They collect possessions that glitter but drain, and they never realize they are speaking the wrong language. The reason this matters so deeply is that assets and liabilities multiply differently over time. Assets compound. They produce income that can be reinvested into more assets. Liabilities compound in reverse. They generate expenses, which lead to debt, which leads to interest, which devours even more cash flow. One path spirals upward, the other downward. Without fluency, you drift into the downward spiral, mistaking it for progress. You can test this truth in your own life. Ask yourself, if I stopped working tomorrow, which of my possessions would continue to pay me, and which would demand payment from me? The answer reveals your balance of assets and liabilities. For many, the list of assets is shockingly short. But that awareness is a first step toward fluency. The wealthy raise their children to speak this language early. Instead of rewarding them with toys that depreciate, they sometimes buy small shares of stock or help them start tiny businesses. A father might say, "This bicycle costs $100, but this investment might pay you $100 every year." The lesson is clear. Seek the things that give back. This awareness, taught young, builds habits that last a lifetime. The hidden language of money is not complicated, but it is concealed. Once you hear it, you cannot unhear it. You begin to see assets and liabilities everywhere. You see them in your home, in your car, in your subscriptions, in your habits. And once you start listening, you begin to choose differently. That is when wealth begins, not with a raise, not with degree, but with fluency in a language no one taught you in school. Once you begin to hear the hidden language of money, you notice how quietly it determines destinies. Most people never learn it, and so they spend their lives translating success into possessions that drain them. They buy bigger houses, shinier cars, and newer gadgets, believing each step proves progress. Yet month after month their accounts empty, their debts grow, and their freedom slips further away. The illusion is strong because society celebrates liabilities as trophies, while assets work silently in the background, unglamorous but powerful. Think of the neighbor who upgrades his house every few years. He moves into a larger home worth $300,000, then $400,000, then $500,000. From the outside, he appears successful. But inside his bank statements, the mortgage payments climb, the taxes rise, and the maintenance costs swell. Each new purchase removes more money than the last. His success is a liability masquerade. Contrast him with another neighbor who bought a modest duplex for $200,000. Instead of expanding his lifestyle, he rented one side for $1,200 monthly, while living in the other. His mortgage was only $1,000, which meant the rent covered the debt and left him with extra. His house spoke the language of an asset, while the other spoke the language of liability. The wealthy refine this language until it becomes instinct. They cannot look at an object without asking, "Does this put money into my pocket or take money out?" A painting on a wall may be art, but if it appreciates in value and can be sold for profit, it is an asset. If it requires expensive insurance and never returns a cent, it is a liability disguised as culture. Even entertainment is evaluated differently. A boat may drain thousands each year in storage, fuel, and repairs, unless it is rented out to others. Then the same boat can become an asset. The difference is not in the object itself, but in the flow it creates. Consider Anthony, who earned an average income working in logistics. When he received a small inheritance of $20,000, he faced a choice. Friends encouraged him to buy a new car. Instead, he studied vending machines and purchased 5 units placed in local businesses. Each machine produced about $150 profit monthly. Within a year, his machines generated $9,000 annually, almost half the inheritance returned every year. By the end of 3 years, Anthony had already doubled his original investment. Had he chosen the car, its value would have dropped by half in that same time. His machines, simple and unglamorous, spoke fluently in the language of assets, while the car would have spoken only in the language of liability. The danger of ignoring this language is that liabilities often disguise themselves as assets. Take the classic example of higher education. A degree can be an asset if it significantly increases your earning power and opens doors to opportunities. But if you spend $100,000 on loans to enter a career that pays $35,000 annually, the degree becomes a liability, pulling money from you instead of adding it. The same is true of a house, a car, even a business. Not every business is an asset. If it constantly requires cash injections, produces little return, and consumes your time, it is a liability wearing the mask of entrepreneurship. Another truth is that assets often look boring. They are not glamorous or exciting at first. Rental properties, dividend stocks, vending machines, small service businesses. They do not attract applause at dinner parties, but they generate steady flow. Liabilities, on the other hand, often look impressive. New cars, luxury watches, oversized homes. They sparkle in photos and create envy, but they drain silently. Society teaches you to admire the sparkle and ignore the flow. That is why so many educated people remain broke, while quiet individuals who focus on assets build fortunes unnoticed. Think of Rachel, a school counselor earning $48,000 annually. Instead of spending her summers on vacations she could not afford, she worked part-time and invested her savings into dividend-paying stocks. At first, the dividends were small, only $300 in the first year, but she reinvested them faithfully. After 10 years, her portfolio produced nearly $6,000 annually. That income required no extra labor and arrived consistently. It grew while she slept. Her friends teased her for living frugally, but by her mid-40s, Rachel had options they did not. She could choose to reduce her hours to travel or to support her family because her assets spoke for her. That is a quiet, hidden power of fluency. The wealthy also understand that liabilities are not inherently evil. A car can be useful. A home can provide comfort. The problem is mistaking them for assets. When you acknowledge them as liabilities, you can manage them wisely. You can keep them within limits, ensuring that assets always outweigh liabilities. The danger lies in blindness, collecting liabilities without ever realizing they are bleeding your future dry. At this point, you must evaluate your own life. List everything you own and ask, does this add to me or does it take from me? You may be shocked at how many liabilities hide behind the mask of possessions, but that shock is your doorway to fluency. Once you see clearly, you can begin to shift the balance. Every dollar directed toward an asset strengthens your position. Every dollar trapped in a liability weakens it. The shift does not need to be dramatic at first. Even replacing one liability with one small asset begins to tilt the scales. Over time, the tilt becomes momentum, and momentum becomes transformation. The hidden language of assets and liabilities is not complicated. It is binary, in or out, add or subtract, feed or drain. But because it was never taught, most people never hear it. Once you begin to listen, you cannot stop. You notice it in every purchase, every contract, every habit. And once you begin to respond to it, your financial life starts to change in ways others will not understand. They will ask why you drive an older car, why you skip the newest phone, why you invest instead of indulge. They will not hear the language you hear. But one day, when your assets whisper freedom and their liabilities scream for payment, the difference will be undeniable. Chapter 5. The rule of leverage no one explains. You were told that success comes from hard work, discipline, and persistence. While those qualities matter, they are only part of the story. The hidden rule, the one almost no one explained to you, is leverage. Leverage is a quiet multiplier that turns effort into exponential results. Without it, you can work yourself to exhaustion and still remain small. With it, you can achieve in a few years what others cannot in a lifetime. Think of a lever in physics. With a simple bar and a fulcrum, you can move a stone too heavy to lift with your bare hands. The same law applies to money and life. Alone, your effort is limited. There are only 24 hours in a day, only so much energy in your body. But with leverage, your effort multiplies. You earn not only from what you do, but from what your systems, your money, and your people do for you. The first form of leverage is financial. Imagine you save $20,000 and invest it in a property. Alone, that amount might seem small. But with leverage, you borrow $180,000 from a bank, purchasing a $200,000 property. If you rent it for $2,000 monthly while your expenses are $1,500, your cash flow is $500 per month or $6,000 annually. Your return is not just on the $20,000 you invested, but on the full property. The leverage of borrowed money amplifies your results. Without it, saving enough to buy the property outright would have taken decades. The second form of leverage is time through people. Alone, you can work only a certain number of hours. But if you build a team, your capacity multiplies. 10 people working 8 hours each day achieve 80 hours of output. If each generates value beyond their wages, your profits expand without requiring more of your own time. That is why businesses scale. That is why wealthy individuals focus not only on what they can do personally, but on what they can build through others. Consider the story of Peter, a talented baker. He started a small shop, baking bread and pastries himself. His first year was exhausting. He woke at 3 a.m, worked 12-hour days, and barely scraped $35,000 in profit. But then he hired 2 assistants. With their help, he could bake 3 times the volume. Within 2 years, his shop's revenue doubled, then tripled. By the time he opened a second location, he had 10 employees producing value he alone never could. His personal labor became less important than the system he built. Leverage through people turned a single bakery into a growing business. The third form of leverage is technology. In the past, reaching 100 people required speaking to them directly. Now, with the internet, you can reach 10,000 or even 1 million at once. A single video, course, or digital product can be duplicated endlessly at almost no cost. This leverage is unprecedented in history. It allows ordinary individuals to multiply their voices, their knowledge, and their influence on a scale once reserved for empires. Yet most people still think like workers, focusing on hours instead of systems. Look at Hannah, a fitness instructor. She earned $45,000 annually teaching classes in person. Her time was capped. Only so many hours, only so many students. Then she recorded a 12-week fitness program and sold it online for $99. In the first year, she sold 1,000 copies, generating nearly $100,000. She earned more in digital sales than in her physical job, and the program kept selling while she slept. Technology gave her leverage. She no longer traded hours for income. She built once, sold forever. But leverage is not without risk. Borrowed money can amplify losses as easily as gains. A poorly managed team can drain profits instead of creating them. Technology can magnify mistakes to a wider audience. That is why the wealthy use leverage carefully, with knowledge and discipline. They do not avoid it, they master it. They know that refusing leverage is choosing smallness, while mastering leverage is choosing scale. The tragedy is that most people were conditioned to fear leverage. They were taught that debt is dangerous, that relying on others is weakness, that technology is risky. And while those warnings are truth, they also keep you trapped. If you never learn to use leverage, you condemn yourself to living only within the limits of your personal strength. You remain a worker in a world where others are builders. You must ask yourself, where can you apply leverage today? Do you have money sitting idle that could be working harder? Do you have skills that could be recorded, multiplied, and sold digitally? Do you have opportunities to delegate tasks that consume your hours but produce little? Each answer is a door to expansion. Every wealthy individual you admire walked through those doors. They stopped thinking in terms of single effort and started thinking in terms of multiplied effort. Leverage is the difference between climbing a hill with your bare hands and driving up in a vehicle. Both paths reach the top, but one drains you while the other lifts you. Once you see the hidden rule, you cannot unsee it. Hard work matters, but multiplied work matters more. And only leverage multiplies. You can push a boulder uphill with your bare hands, or you can use a lever and move it with ease. This is the essence of leverage, and once you grasp it, you begin to see it everywhere. Yet most people ignore it, clinging to the belief that effort alone is noble enough to produce wealth. Effort is noble, but without leverage, effort is limited. You only have one body, one mind, one lifetime. The wealthy do not escape work. They escape limits. Leverage begins with understanding the difference between control and effort. Most people focus on effort, how many hours they can work, how much they can produce personally. The wealthy focus on control, how many systems, assets, and people they can direct to work on their behalf. If you earn $100 for every hour you personally labor, you are still capped at the hours you can give. But if you build a system where 100 customers each pay you $10 monthly, you create $1,000 of income without adding new hours. That is leverage at work. Consider the example of Michael, a software developer. For years, he worked for corporations, earning $90,000 annually. He was skilled, respected, and exhausted. Then he built a small mobile app in his spare time. At first, it brought only a few dollars a day. But as downloads grew, it generated $500 monthly, then $2,000, then $5,000. The work he had done once continued to earn for him every single day. His time was multiplied through technology. While colleagues begged for raises, Michael enjoyed income streams that no boss could control. Leverage also appears in relationships. You were taught to compete with others, to guard your work, to protect your secrets. But wealth grows fastest through collaboration. A single person may have skill, but a team creates synergy. One person's weakness is another's strength. A partnership can unlock doors you could never open alone. The wealthy know this. They form alliances, hire experts, and create networks that extend their reach far beyond personal capacity. Look at Denise, a fashion designer. For years, she created pieces alone, selling them at local markets. She could make only so many garments in a week, and her income remained stagnant. Then she partnered with a manufacturer overseas. Her designs were produced at scale, shipped worldwide, and sold online. Her income multiplied tenfold, not because she worked harder, but because she leveraged people, resources, and systems. By sharing control, she expanded influence. What she lost in exclusivity, she gained in scale. Another overlooked form of leverage is knowledge. When you invest in learning, you compress decades of trial and error into days. A single book may cost $20, but save you $20,000 in mistakes. A mentor may charge $2,000 for coaching, but accelerate your growth by 5 years. Education itself is leverage, but only if it is applied. The tragedy is that most people stop learning after school, believing their diploma is enough. Meanwhile, the wealthy remain perpetual students, seeking every edge that can multiply their results. But leverage has an emotional barrier. Fear. People fear debt, fear dependence on others, fear exposure through technology, fear change through knowledge. They cling to what feels safe, ignoring that safety is often the greatest risk. Refusing leverage leaves you fragile, because fragility comes from depending solely on yourself. The wealthy embrace calculated risk because they know leverage without knowledge can destroy, but leverage with mastery can liberate. Think of Samuel, who worked as a real estate agent. He earned decent commissions but wanted more. Instead of spending his earnings on lifestyle, he borrowed money to purchase a 4-unit apartment building. His friends warned him, debt is dangerous. But Samuel understood leverage. The tenant's rent covered the mortgage, maintenance, and still left him with $1,000 monthly profit. Within 5 years, he refinanced, purchased a second property, and doubled his cash flow. What others feared, he mastered. That is the difference between those who remain small and those who grow. Leverage even applies to time you have not yet lived. Every hour you spend building systems today is an hour multiplied in the future. Writing a book may take 500 hours, but if it sells for decades, it pays you long after the work is finished. Recording a course may take months, but it can reach thousands year after year. Building a team may require sacrifice at first, but once trained, they free you to expand further. The wealthy think in these terms constantly. They ask, how can I spend my time once and be paid many times? Without that question, you are trapped in the cycle of single effort, single pay. You must begin to see your own life through this lens. Where are you working alone when you could be leveraging others? Where are you trading hours for survival instead of building systems for freedom? Where are you hiding behind fear instead of multiply your potential? The answers may sting, but they reveal the doorway to growth. The hidden rule is clear. Leverage is not optional if you want wealth. It is the multiplier that separates those who struggle endlessly from those who scale beyond themselves. You cannot lift the world with your bare hands, but with the right lever, you can move mountains. Once you master this, you stop asking, how much can I do? And start asking, how much can I multiply? That is when wealth begins to expand without limits. Chapter 6. The Truth About Freedom and Wealth. You were taught that wealth is about numbers, about the size of your paycheck, the balance of your account, the value of your possessions. But when you begin to look deeper, you realize that true wealth is not measured in digits, but in freedom. Freedom is the ability to choose how you spend your time, whom you spend it with, and what you devote your energy toward. Without freedom, even large numbers can feel like chains. With freedom, even modest means can feel abundant. This is a truth about wealth that the system never explained. Think about the thousands of people who earn six figures, yet remain prisoners of their jobs. They live in big houses, drive expensive cars, and post pictures of their vacations, but they cannot afford to stop working. Their expenses chase their income, their debts chain them to their employers, and their time is never their own. They look wealthy on the outside, but inside they are exhausted and fragile. Contrast that with the person who lives modestly but owns assets that cover their expenses. They may not earn as much, but they wake each morning free from alarms, free from fear, free to design their day. Who is truly wealthy? The one with the numbers or the one with the freedom? Freedom comes when your money works harder than you do, when your assets generate enough to cover your expenses. You cross a threshold. At that point, you are no longer dependent on a job for survival. You can choose to work, but you no longer must. That choice is priceless. It transforms your relationship with life. Stress decreases, creativity increases, and opportunities appear because you're not blinded by desperation. Consider Olivia, a woman who worked as a nurse for nearly 20 years. Her salary was steady, about $55,000 annually, but she lived carefully, investing small amounts every month. Over time, her investments grew into rental properties and dividend stocks producing $28,000 per year. Combined with part-time nursing, she surpassed her old salary while working fewer hours. But more important than the numbers was the freedom it gave her. She could choose to spend mornings with her children, take extended vacations, or reduce her shift without fear. Olivia discovered that wealth is not the amount you earn, but the amount of life you control. Another hidden truth is that freedom is relative. For someone with monthly expenses of $10,000, freedom may require assets generating $10,000. For another with expenses of $3,000, freedom may require only $3,000. The size of your freedom depends less on income and more on lifestyle. Many people sabotage their own independence by inflating their expenses each time income grows. They run faster on the treadmill, chasing numbers instead of freedom. The wealthy often move in the opposite direction, keeping expenses stable while assets grow. By resisting lifestyle inflation, they cross into freedom sooner than others with larger paychecks. You must also understand that freedom cannot be postponed indefinitely. The system conditions you to sacrifice your best years in the hope of retirement. Work 40 years, save diligently, and then at 65, enjoy life. But how much life remains by then? How much health? How much energy? The wealthy design their lives to experience freedom along the way, not only at the end. They build streams of cash flow early so they can enjoy both the present and the future. They refuse to live only for tomorrow. Think of Roberto, an immigrant who arrived with little money but a sharp mind for discipline. He worked in construction during the day and drove deliveries at night, saving every dollar he could. Instead of inflating his lifestyle, he bought a small duplex, living in one unit and renting the other. Within 5 years, he acquired 3 more properties. By the time he was 40, his rental income surpassed his construction wages. He chose to reduce his work hours, focusing on his children and his community. He was not the richest man in town, but he was free. His wealth was measured in mornings spent with his family, evenings without stress, and weekends dedicated to what mattered. Numbers alone cannot capture that kind of wealth. True freedom also reshapes your identity. When you no longer depend on a paycheck, you stop asking, what job can I get? And start asking, what life do I want? That shift is profound. It allows you to align your days with your values. If you want to create, you create. If you want to serve, you serve. If you want to travel, you travel. Money becomes a servant, not a master. That is a hidden truth. Wealth is not about possessions, but about permission. The permission to live on your own terms. At this stage, you must ask yourself, what does freedom look like for you? Is it mornings without alarm clocks, afternoons spent with family, evenings free of financial stress? Is it the ability to work from anywhere, to choose projects you love, to refuse opportunities that do not align with your values? Until you define your version of freedom, you may chase numbers endlessly, never realizing they were only tools, not the goal. The truth about freedom and wealth is both simple and radical. Money is not the destination. It is the vehicle. If you use it only to buy liabilities, it enslaves you. If you use it to build assets, it frees you. The choice is yours. But once you see this truth, you can no longer measure wealth only in numbers. You must measure it in freedom. You have seen how income, assets, liabilities, and leverage shape your financial path, but all of them point toward a single destination: freedom. Freedom is not abstract. It is practical. It determines whether you wake up because you want to or because you must. It determines whether you say yes to opportunities that excite you or yes to obligations that suffocate you. The final hidden rule is that money is never the goal. It is the means to freedom, and freedom is the goal. Most people misunderstand this. They believe more possessions equal more freedom. They chase larger homes, luxury cars, and expensive vacations, thinking these symbols prove independence. But these possessions often create dependence. A bigger house demands higher mortgage payments. A luxury car requires higher insurance and maintenance. Expensive vacations put balances on credit cards that linger for years. The result is not freedom, but slavery disguised as success. True freedom begins when your choices are not dictated by debt, when your time is not rented by an employer, and when your energy is not drained by obligations you never wanted. Imagine Daniel and Sarah, a couple in their early 40s. Daniel earns $120,000 annually as a corporate manager, while Sarah earns $80,000 as a pharmacist. Their combined income is $200,000, which impresses everyone around them, but their expenses consume nearly all of it. A large mortgage, 2 luxury cars, private schooling, and lifestyle costs leave them with less than $5,000 annually in savings. Despite their high income, they live in quiet fear. If either loses their job, the house of cards collapses. Their numbers are large, but their freedom is small. Now consider Miguel, a mechanic who earns $60,000 annually. He lives in a modest home worth $150,000 with a small mortgage. Instead of buying new cars, he drives a used one and repairs it himself. Over the years, he purchased 2 rental properties that together produce $1,200 monthly after expenses. Combined with his salary, his total income is less than Daniel and Sarah's, but his freedom is greater. If his job ended tomorrow, his rentals would still cover his mortgage, utilities, and basic needs. He is not chained to fear. He is not trapped by lifestyle. He is free in ways his wealthier neighbors are not. This contrast proves a final hidden rule. Wealth without freedom is not wealth at all. Numbers on a page mean nothing if you are not free to live as you choose. Another dimension of freedom is time. You may believe you will find freedom later, after promotion, after the debt is gone, after retirement. But waiting is a dangerous game. Life does not guarantee tomorrow. The wealthy do not postpone freedom indefinitely. They design it into their lives step by step. They create assets that cover part of their expenses, even if not all. They buy back hours gradually, first reducing overtime, then reduce a reliance on a single job, then finally breaking free completely. Freedom can arrive in stages. It does not need to wait until the end. Think of Jasmine, a teacher who earned $42,000 annually. She loved her students but hated the bureaucracy. She began tutoring online in the evenings, charging $30 per hour. Within a year, her side work produced $800 monthly. She used that income to pay off debt, then to invest in dividend-paying stocks. Within 5 years, her portfolio produced $3,000 annually. At that point, she reduced her teaching schedule to part-time, focusing only on subjects she loved. She did not wait until retirement to enjoy freedom. She built it early, piece by piece. The wealthy also understand that freedom requires alignment with values. Money alone does not guarantee happiness. If you build assets that free your time but fill your days with work you hate, you are still a prisoner. Freedom is the power to choose how you use your time, not just the absence of financial stress. That is why many wealthy individuals dedicate their energy to causes, passions, and communities once they achieve independence. They know that life without purpose is another kind of poverty. You must ask yourself now, what would you do if money were no longer a constraint? Would you travel? Would you create? Would you serve? Would you spend more time with your family? Your answers define your vision of freedom. Without that vision, money will never satisfy you. You will keep chasing numbers without realizing they were only tools. The danger is that you may reach old age wealthy in digits but bankrupt in experience. That is the cost of pursuing wealth without freedom. The truth about freedom and wealth is both liberating and terrifying. Liberating, because you realize you can design your life differently. Terrifying, because it forces you to admit that many of your choices so far have been guided by illusions. But once you see the truth, you cannot return to blindness. You begin to measure wealth not in income but in options, not in possessions but in peace, not in numbers but in choices. So you stand here with the final hidden rule. Money is not your master, but your servant. If you use it wisely, it will buy back your time, amplify your choices, and give you the freedom to live fully. If you misuse it, it will enslave you, chaining your time, limiting your choices, and stealing your life. The choice is always yours. And now that you know the truth, you can no longer say you were not taught in school. You have discovered the lesson for yourself.